The wind over the Yorkshire moors had a cruel way of slipping through even the thickest coat. Eliza Hart tightened her woolen scarf around her neck and pulled Sophie closer as they made their way along the gravel path to Hartwell Manor. The skies above churned with a heavy grey, promising more rain before the night was through. The manor stood atop a lonely hill, ancient and brooding. Its weather-stained stones and ivy-choked walls gave it the appearance of a sleeping giant, wounded and resentful. Eliza hesitated at the sight of it, memories pressing against her mind like cold, unwelcome hands. She had been only 17 when tragedy had torn her from these grounds. Now, years later, she returned, not by choice but by obligation. The letter had come without warning, the handwriting so rigid and formal it might have been chiseled from ice. You are cordially invited to the Hartwell family gathering. Attendance is expected, it had said, offering no warmth, no apology, only command. Sophie, her small gloved hand tight in Eliza's, looked up with wide, anxious eyes. "Mummy, are you sure they will be kind?" she asked, her breath misting in the air. Eliza forced a smile, though a pang twisted in her chest. "We shall find out soon enough, sweetheart." The heavy oak doors, blackened with age, groaned as the butler heaved them open. He was a bent figure, with thin grey hair and a face lined like crumpled parchment. His eyes flickered over them, taking in the modest trunk, the worn hems of Eliza's coat, the childish scuff marks on Sophie's boots. "Name?" he asked, though surely he already knew. "Eliza Hart," she said steadily. "And my daughter, Sophie." The butler stepped aside with a grunt. They entered a wide, dimly lit hall where the air smelled of old wood, faded roses, and something less identifiable, the scent of long-held secrets. Portraits of grim-faced ancestors loomed from the walls, their painted gazes cold and pitiless. The tap of heels echoed down the grand staircase. Lady Clarissa descended with the slow, deliberate grace of a queen surveying unwelcome visitors. Her silver hair was pinned so tightly it seemed to stretch her face, sharpening the corners of her mouth into a perpetual frown. Beside her, Beatrice Hartwell lingered on a higher step, her youthful face twisted into a smirk that barely hid her scorn. "You are late," Lady Clarissa said, her voice like frost creeping over a windowpane. "And you have brought complications." Eliza's chin lifted a fraction. "We came as swiftly as we could." Beatrice gave a low, unpleasant chuckle. "Swiftly? From London? My, how times have changed." Ignoring the comment, Lady Clarissa motioned to the butler. "Put them in the study. It is all that remains." The butler nodded once and shuffled away, leading them through long, narrow corridors where the candlelight flickered and the floorboards sighed beneath their feet. He pushed open a heavy door to reveal a dusty, neglected room. Old books sagged on sagging shelves, leather chairs sat cracked and forgotten, and a single thin rug covered the drafty wooden floor. "There will be no meals brought after supper," the butler said without apology. "Breakfast is at 7. And with that he left, the door clicking shut behind him with an almost triumphant sound. Eliza scanned the room, her heart sinking. She took off her coat and laid it over the threadbare rug. "Come here, darling," she whispered, and Sophie obediently curled against her side. Outside the grimy window, the moor winds howled and beat against the glass. A lonely, sorrowful sound. Eliza wrapped her arms around Sophie tighter. She could feel the thinness of the girl's jacket, could hear the tiny shiver that ran through her. It filled her with a slow, simmering anger. Whatever had brought them here, whatever reason Lady Clarissa and the Hartwells had for summoning her back, she would find it. She would endure this cold house and its colder inhabitants. For Sophie. For the truth. And tomorrow, the games would begin. The first night at Hartwell Manor was a restless one. Shadows seemed to stretch and crawl across the walls as the wind rattled the windows like impatient fingers tapping for entry. Eliza lay awake on the narrow settee, listening to the ancient house groan and mutter around her. Sophie had fallen asleep quickly, exhausted from the journey and the cold welcome. She now murmured softly in her dreams, clutching the edge of Eliza's coat with small, desperate fingers. Eliza stared at the cracked ceiling, her mind racing. There had been no true greeting, no warmth, no explanations. Only the curt reception from Lady Clarissa and the smirking presence of Beatrice. Somewhere in this sprawling, rotting house, her other relatives lurked, cousins and uncles she had not seen since childhood. What had brought them all back here? Summoned by the iron will of Lady Clarissa. The clock in the distant hallway struck midnight with 12 deep, solemn chimes. As the last echo faded, Eliza heard it, A low whispering sound, barely louder than the sighing of the wind. She sat up slowly, heart thudding. The whispering came again, a rustling, murmuring noise that seemed to slip along the skirting boards and seep through the cracks. Pushing the blanket aside, Eliza moved carefully towards the door. She pressed her ear against the ancient wood. The whispering was clearer now, though the words were indistinct, as if 2 or 3 voices spoke over each other. She opened the door a fraction. The hallway beyond was dark except for a single candle sputtering in its wall bracket. The flame cast long, shivering shadows. Eliza hesitated. It could be nothing, a trick of an old house full of drafts and memories. Yet some stubborn instinct drove her forward. She pulled on her boots quietly, checked that Sophie was still asleep, and slipped into the corridor. The air was colder here, sharp with the scent of damp stone. The whispering grew louder, guiding her towards a bend in the hallway where a tapestry hung, its threads faded and brittle. As she neared, she realized the sound was not coming from beyond the tapestry but behind the wall itself. She reached out to touch the old cloth. It shifted slightly under her fingers, and behind it, her hand brushed something unexpected. A small wooden panel, fitted so seamlessly into the stonework that it would be invisible to an untrained eye. Eliza's breath caught. She pressed her palm against the panel. It gave way with a faint creak, revealing a narrow opening just wide enough for a slender person to slip through. The whispering stopped. Beyond the opening was blackness, thick and suffocating. A sudden cold gust from the unseen depths made her flinch. A voice whispered then, so close it was almost inside her ear. "Leave. While you can." Eliza stumbled back, heart hammering, and the hidden panel swung silently shut, sealing the darkness away once more. She turned and fled down the corridor, not daring to look back. When she reached the study, she found Sophie sitting up on the settee, wide-eyed. "Mummy," she said in a small voice. "There was a man at the window. He was watching us." Eliza crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled Sophie into her arms, casting a frantic glance at the grimy panes. Outside, the moor stretched into endless darkness. No figure stood there now, but the glass still bore the faintest outline of a handprint, pressed against the outside. She drew the curtains shut with a violent tug, her mind racing. Hartwell Manor was not just a crumbling house filled with resentful family. It was something more. Something dangerous. And now they were trapped inside it. Morning brought no comfort to Hartwell Manor. A pall of mist clung stubbornly to the grounds, making the crumbling statues in the gardens appear like mourners at a forgotten funeral. Eliza dressed quickly, wrapping Sophie in layers of clothing to keep the chill at bay. Together, they ventured into the house, determined to find answers. The grand hall was emptier than she remembered, its faded tapestries hanging limp against the stone walls. Dust floated in the cold shafts of light that pierced through the grimy windows. Voices drifted from the dining room. Eliza hesitated, then pushed the heavy oak door open. Inside, the family had gathered. A dozen faces turned towards her, pale, pinched, and filled with suspicion. There was Uncle Gregory, his once powerful frame now stooped and withered. Cousin Margaret, her eyes darting nervously from side to side. Young Edward, barely older than a boy, with a cruel smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. At the head of the table sat Lady Clarissa, draped in dark velvet, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Beatrice stood behind her chair like a sentinel. "Good morning, Eliza," Lady Clarissa said, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "You and your daughter are just in time for the reading." Eliza frowned. "Reading?" Lady Clarissa's thin lips curved into something resembling a smile. "The will, of course." Before Eliza could respond, a tall, severe-looking man entered the room, carrying a bundle of papers. His name was Mr. Hargreaves, the family solicitor, a man who looked as though he had been carved from the very stones of Hartwell itself. He cleared his throat. "We are gathered here, as stipulated by the late Lord Bertram Hartwell, to hear the conditions of his final testament." Whispers rippled through the room like a rising tide. Lord Bertram, Eliza's grandfather, had been a cruel and distant man. She remembered his cold eyes and the heavy ring he always wore, a family heirloom that seemed to gleam with a life of its own. Mr. Hargreaves began to read. The list of legacies was short and sharp. Small sums of money to distant relatives. Minor possessions bequeathed to old friends. Nothing of real consequence. Then his voice deepened, and the room grew still. "To my granddaughter Eliza Hartwell, and her daughter Sophie Hartwell, I leave Hartwell Manor and its grounds, upon one condition. Eliza's breath caught. You must reside within the manor for a full year and a day, without leaving the estate under any circumstance. Should you fail, the inheritance shall pass to the next rightful heir. A stunned silence filled the dining room, followed almost immediately by the crackling undercurrent of barely concealed anger. Eliza felt all eyes upon her, heavy with resentment and greed. It was clear none of them had expected this. Certainly not Beatrice, whose expression twisted momentarily before she smoothed it into a mask of politeness. Lady Clarissa rose from her seat. "Welcome home, my dear," she said with an unsettling sweetness. "May you find Hartwell Manor accommodating." The meal that followed was a grim affair. The food was cold and tasteless. Conversations were murmured and sharp, like knives sliding against each other. Sophie sat quietly beside Eliza, her small hand gripping Eliza's tightly under the table. When the meal was finally over, Eliza stood, her chair scraping against the stone floor with a screech that made several people flinch. She led Sophie from the room, aware of the burning gaze of her relatives upon her back. As they crossed the hall, Eliza felt a strange vibration through the soles of her boots. A low hum, barely perceptible, as if the house itself had a heartbeat. In that moment, she realized something chilling. The condition set by her grandfather was no accident. He had wanted them here. Wanted them trapped within these crumbling walls. And Hartwell Manor was already beginning to awaken. The nights at Hartwell Manor grew heavier, thick with silence that seemed alive. On the third evening, as Eliza sat by the cracked fireplace reading to Sophie, a faint scratching echoed through the stone walls. She paused, tilting her head. The noise stopped. Sophie nestled closer. "Mummy, someone's whispering." Eliza's heart thudded painfully. "It's just the wind," she said, though she didn't believe it. Later that night, when the house had settled into uneasy slumber, Eliza ventured alone into the corridors. She carried a candle, the flame flickering wildly in unseen drafts. Shadows loomed, stretching grotesquely along the stone. She paused outside a forgotten door near the library. The scratching came again, more insistent, desperate. Holding her breath, Eliza reached for the doorknob. It turned easily. Inside, the room was choked with dust and cobwebs. An ancient tapestry sagged from the wall, depicting the Hartwell family crest, a black raven perched on a silver shield. Something caught her eye at the tapestry's edge. A sliver of wood, slightly ajar. A hidden door. With trembling fingers, Eliza pushed it open. A narrow stairway descended into darkness, breathing a cold, damp air onto her face. Behind her, the sound of soft footsteps made her whirl around. But the corridor was empty. Her candle sputtered. The flame died. In total darkness, Eliza felt the house pressing in on her, as if the walls themselves leaned closer, eager to swallow her whole. Somewhere deep below, a whisper, unmistakably real, called her name. Eliza. The next morning, Eliza tried to pretend the hidden stairway had been a nightmare. But Hartwell Manor would not let her forget. At breakfast, Beatrice's gaze lingered too long. Lady Clarissa offered a cold smile, as if she knew secrets Eliza had yet to uncover. Determined, Eliza returned to the tapestry room. She armed herself with a lantern this time and pushed open the secret door once more. The stairway yawned before her, black and endless. Clutching Sophie's locket around her neck, Eliza descended. The air grew colder with each step. The stone walls wept moisture. The steps creaked as if groaning under the weight of long-buried memories. At the bottom, she found a low corridor lined with iron doors. Cells. This had been a dungeon. In the furthest cell, something glinted in the lantern light. She approached cautiously, heart hammering. A child's doll lay in the dirt, its face cracked and eyes missing. It wore a tiny velvet dress, eerily similar to the one Sophie owned. Carved into the wall above it was a message, scratched in desperation. "Help me!" Eliza staggered back, bile rising in her throat. As she fled up the stairs, she heard the door at the top slam shut. And behind her, faint and sorrowful, came the sound of a child crying. The next few days blurred into one another. Eliza tried to act normally, attending meals, listening to the endless bickering among the relatives. But inside, she was unraveling. She caught whispered conversations that ceased the moment she entered a room. Doors she swore she had closed were found ajar. Sophie spoke of the sad girl who visited her at night. One afternoon, while exploring the dusty library, Eliza found an old ledger hidden among the books. It detailed the history of the Hartwell family. Births, deaths, and disappearances. Whole generations had seemingly vanished within these walls. Eliza's fingers traced a name written hastily in the margins. Annabel Hartwell, 1832 to 1840. 8 years old. Sophie's age. The ledger said nothing about her fate, only that she had gone missing within the manor. The coincidences were too much. Was it Annabel who whispered through the walls? And if so, what did she want? That night, as storms battered the manor, Eliza made a decision. She would confront Lady Clarissa. Braving the thundering rain, she entered the drawing room where Lady Clarissa sat by the fire, a glass of dark sherry in hand. "You knew," Eliza said without preamble. "You knew what this place really is." Lady Clarissa looked up, unbothered. "We all serve Hartwell Manor, dear. As it serves us." Eliza stepped closer, fists clenched. "You've trapped us here." Clarissa's eyes gleamed. "Your grandfather made a pact. Generations ago. To keep the family's power intact, a sacrifice must be made. The manor must always have its soul." Eliza's mouth went dry. "And Sophie?" she whispered. Clarissa smiled thinly. "Every generation must give. It is tradition." The room seemed to tilt. Eliza stumbled back, revulsion and horror crashing over her. She had to protect Sophie, no matter the cost. Haunted by Clarissa's confession, Eliza began seeing things. Shadows flickering where none should be. A pale figure watching from the corner of her eye. She found a worn diary hidden beneath her bed. Annabel's. The child's desperate entry spoke of fear, of cold hands grabbing her at night, of her mother's silence when she begged for help. The last entry chilled Eliza to the bone. "Tonight, I will hide. If they find me, I will never leave." The next morning, she found Sophie's bed empty. Panic seizing her, Eliza tore through the manor, calling her daughter's name. In the upper corridors, where the dust was thickest, she saw tiny footprints, leading to the attic. The attic was a vast, echoing cavern beneath the sagging roof. Moonlight cut silver blades through the broken windows, illuminating furniture draped in yellowed sheets. At the far end, Sophie stood facing the wall. "Sophie!" Eliza cried, racing to her. The child turned. Her eyes were wide, glassy. Her lips moved silently. Behind her, the wall shimmered. Emerging from it was the faint shape of a little girl, her hair in ragged braids, her dress torn and blood-stained. Annabel. Her translucent hand reached for Sophie. "No!" Eliza screamed. She snatched Sophie up, shielding her. The ghost's face twisted in sorrow, then rage. The walls of the attic groaned. The air turned icy. Eliza clutched the locket around her neck, Sophie's locket, and instinctively opened it. Inside was a tiny photo. Sophie as a baby. She pressed the locket against Annabel's hand. There was a sound like a sigh, then a crack. The ghost blinked once, and faded. The following morning, the sun rose clear for the first time since Eliza had arrived at Hartwell Manor. Dust motes danced like golden fireflies in the light. In the grand hall, the relatives gathered, subdued and pale. Lady Clarissa watched Eliza approach, something close to fear flickering in her ancient eyes. "The pact is broken," Eliza said firmly. Clarissa's mouth tightened, but she said nothing. Eliza turned and left them standing there, Sophie's hand secure in hers. As they stepped into the garden, the mist parted. For the first time, the statues seemed less like mourners and more like guardians. The manor watched them go, but it did not call them back. At least not yet.